you let me know whenever the stream actually goes up?
It's up. Let me mute the mic real quick.
JT, it's JT debate. JTE. Oh, for some reason, Gmail saved the my incorrectly typed it. So just resend that to it. Or Kirsch, would you just add them to the email chain? Because you know how to do that without making a new one. Okay. This is cool with everyone if I open this. Alright, is everybody, or is anyone not ready?
Oh, wait.
Timer.
JTE debate, you got it right. But I spelled debate wrong. I spelled it DB instead of DE.
Got a Ewing?
Yeah, we're about to start the winning
We're all
scene.
here.
We're all here? Excellent.
Alright, you've been included on the chain. The citations and the 1AC are now sent. Ready? Is anybody not ready? Okay. This year, Brian Kirsch and myself have spent 7 months discussing the histories that underline found the war powers topic. We've had debates about the existence of Geronimo, the Chiricahua Apache Nation, and the first uses of indefinite detention. We've interrupted the calcified legal doctrines that were used by Andrew Jackson to justify violence against Seminole Indians in Florida. These legal fictions are still present in the National Defense Authorization Act and are part and parcel with the legacy upheld throughout the executive agency, which conflates American Indians with terrorism. Is it any wonder that the great Native American nations of this country were dealt with entirely through the War Power, or the War Department of the United States for close to 200 years, or that when executing Osama bin Laden, the U.S. referred to him as Geronimo? This year, we've warned this community that these laws about detention are a permanent feature of the United States, which is waiting in the shadows to squash any attempts at liberation or self-determination. This isn't conjecture or grandstanding. This is a historically verifiable practice of a colonial government. We have to look no further back than 40 years to find the American government's vicious presence at the Pine Ridge reservations, using goon squads, targeted killing, and indefinite detention to detain members of the American Indian movement, the Red Power movements. These were just too dangerous to these Eurocentric founders that they actively used the FBI COINTEL program to extinguish and subdue these ways of thinking. But this isn't just about red bodies. These war powers were also used in the FBI's attempt to dissolve the Black Panther Party. There are the war powers that were used that were scared of Assata Shakur and tried to kill her until she went to Cuba, where she waits, waiting to strike. This isn't just about Leonard Peltier, prisoner number 89637-132, whose body has been caged but whose mind and ideas can never be subdued. This is also about Anime Picto Aqua. She was targeted and killed by the federal government through snitch jacketing. The FBI purposely alienated her from her own people, made her look like she was a government informer, and then found her body, chopped her hands off, and declared her death due to exposure despite the bullet hole lodged in the back of her head. The FBI then tried to cover up their violence and attempted to put other Red Power warriors on trial. COINTELPRO's violence is systematic. It is an illegal practice that is part of an overt scheme for surveillance, infiltration, dissemination of false information, group conflict, and collaboration in assaults and assassinations. The FBI used its war powers domestically first before ever using them abroad in other acts of Eurocentric state violence upon difference. This is not just about the unrestrained use of power. This is about the very survival of those across the country and across the planet who protest and dissident. After the United States had used its war powers to subdue black and red bodies domestically, it extended its aim towards other non-white bodies across the globe, from Vietnam to Grenada and on and on. We have clear showings of military brutality, but this year we have also reminded this community about the war powers enacted at America's southern border. We've decades worth of border patrol and its militarization of the Mexican lands, its criminalization of migrant identity, and its disgusting rhetorical labels used to denounce an entire race of people. We have informed this community about Operation Gatekeeper, which has killed more than 4,000 people at the border since 1994. We have told you about the detention centers where proud Latina and Latino and Hispanic people are held indefinitely for nothing more than living where their people have lived for generations prior to European conquest of this continent. We've asked several people, how are these acts of violence any different than the war powers topic? Are we really to accept that the only distinction of fictitious legal ideological terminology designed to obfuscate responsibility for the government itself. What we have provided this year is evidence towards forgotten acts of violence and ongoing attempts by a ruthless government to kill black, red, brown, yellow skin whenever it appears. We have presented you with the physical manifestations of genocide. This one I see is a warning about the ideological tools of law used to silence populations, force consent, and truth upon marginalized communization and construct formats of rhetorical imperialism to insulate the status quo from any capacity of change. These laws, by their very essence, create, sustain, maintain, and legitimate the inequality of European institutions, but it wasn't just the body that these Eurocentric colonial cowards feared. It was the mind, it was the ideas, the beliefs, the positions, and the strength of a world that didn't need to think like them. In the midst of this fear, we find the creation and concretization of the Western University and Academy itself. This academy is the space of both genocide and epistemicide. Gross-Hugel and 13. The implications of the epistemicide, the extermination of knowledge and ways of knowing. How is it possible that social science is based on knowledge produced by a few men from Western Europe? The canon of thought is founded by men. This provincialism is disguised under the universality. The pretension is that the knowledge produced has the effective universal capacity. Their theories are supposed to be sufficient to explain the social historical realities of the Western world. Our job is to reduce that epistemic privilege and epistemic inferiority. Our two sides of the coin. The coin is called epistemic racism, sexism, and westernized universities. The knowledge produced by other epistemologies are considered inferior, and this connection of the academy is prefaced by the extermination of 4 specific groups in the 16th century. The Cartesian notion of I think therefore I am as an epistemic frame is a product of ego extreme. No, I exterminate therefore I am. This the epistemic privilege of the academy is thus bound by the 16th century genocides of Muslims, Jews, indigenous peoples and of North America, the African slave trade, and the burning alive of women accused of witchcraft. Gross-Hugel and 13. What links that category therefore I am with I think therefore I am? The epistemic racism, sexism produced by the exterminate therefore I am. It is genocide is epistemicide that mediates that conquer with the I think therefore genocides, epistemicides of the long 16th century are the socio-historical conditions of I think therefore I am. These war against Muslims and Jews in the name of purity of blood, against indigenous peoples first in America and then in Asia, African people with the captive trade and their enslavement, against women who practice Indo-European knowledge, Jews being which is the attempt to see them as interlinked as constitutive epistemic structures. These 4 genocides were epistemic that are constitutive of Western men of epistemic privilege, and we have done far more this year than just elucidate the history of violence beyond the hail of the topic. Behind every attempt by the government to use war powers as an act of suppression is an idea and a way of thinking that the United States finds to be dangerous to its very epistemic core. Behind our advocacy of the Zapatistas in January and February is the advocacy of an idea of autonomy from neoliberal universality. Behind our criticism of COINTELPRO is an advocacy of ideas of the Red Power movement, the Black Panthers, anime, Aquash, and the Sada Shakur. And behind our interpretation of the naturalized history of indefinite detention are the liberatory ideas of Geronimo, the Cherokee, Apache, and litany of themes struggling in the borderlands. All these challenges represent the vision of the topic offered to you by Brian and myself collectively. Thus, we affirm visions of indigenismo as a means of restricting white supremacy made manifest in the war powers authority of the president. Our vision challenges the indefinite detention of thinking inside both the academy and the structures of genocide. Deloria and 1998 have a single dimension to require chain of connections lead to insights or to catchment to the vision presents a whole picture of the study experience as central meaning as an independent revelation. This difference change from the inductive and deductive logic to transformation of realities become the liberating factor, not continual replacement of data and concepts within. There's no frame of interpretation, liberation, and spirit assembly conceived by some people interested in reformative question regarding assumptions that form the basis of Western civilization. Our race reality discover the impulse to grab easily answers will continue social conditions will be cause and effect logic that are dominating Western thinking programs will fail to account for the changing conditions that occur continually. Ideas will continue to dominate our concerns of visions will not come. We are talking about the destruction of a whole complex of Western theories of knowledge and the construction of a new and more comprehensive synthesis of knowledge and experiences. Tests cannot be accomplished by people or encompassed within the traditional Western logic. If we change the way Western people think, the way they collect data, then we are speaking of liberation as a matter of people can see reality that motivates them to live in a certain ways, provides them a systematic system of values, and enables them to justify their actions as a reality conceived as a vision can accomplish over time. Many changes we have been unable to effect while conceiving solutions as short-term remedies. Fundamental changes will avoid the traditional replacement of words with new words. And regardless of your specific social location, your ballot for the affirmative identifies and acknowledges the violent thinking of the project of modernity. Your vote and trumps universalism of Western epistemology. Your endorsement brings epistemic diversity to the canon of debate and transforms the site from a Western university to a decolonial pluriversity. Gross-Hugel and 13, the Westernized university operates under the universalism where one defines us what is truthful and knowledge to decolonize Westernized university will require to acknowledge the epistemic racism that constitutes epistemic structures, break with the universalism, bring epistemic diversity to create a pluriversal meaning to it, where inter-epistemic conversations producing redefinitions of all concepts with the meaning defining the meaning of Westernized universities. So these 3 points with stopping Westernizing will turn into a decolonial pluriversality. Transmodernity is decolonial pluriversity whose knowledge will be at the capitalist, patriarchal, Western-centered, Christian-centered, modern colonial world system. And the only tangible effect of this debate in this moment in time is learning and teaching. Competition and format can be immensely important to this concept, but the ballot serves a more important role as affirmation of an ethics of pluriversality to be effective in a post-Occidental world. One must affirm the potential of another thinking or for spaces of legitimate thought outside Eurocentric ideology. Ethnocide and humiliation are the inherent products of the universalization of Western thinking in yellow and 2. Okay. Another thinking is a response to questions and issues shaking the world today. Another thinking implies a redistribution of the geopolitics and knowledge as organized like nationalism. Another thing locates itself in all these and under these in the word lane. Another thinking is epistemological and ethical epistemological because it constructs on the critique of the limitation of two metaphysical traditions. Other thinking is not inspired in this own limitation, not intended to dominate, humiliate, a way of thinking that is universally marginal, fragmentary, and cheap is a way of thinking that is not ethnocentric, doesn't characterize modern instrumental reason why chance settled modernity includes rational concept of emancipation and affirms subsume it develops an irrational of justification for genocidal violence, and this isn't an endorsement of reform, nor is it a call to quickly relieve suffering. The violence enacted upon the bodies in the 1AC we discuss have been inhabited by centuries of compound forms of thinking. This cannot and will not be undone by the passing of Law Gloria and 99 liberation. We see people walk away from economic, political, and intellectual mission we call Western civilization. Liberation is not is a difficult task when one no longer finds value, or in a sense, at least liberation requires rejection of everything we have been taught. Western thinking has been a replacement of ideas with information that has been basically changed for centuries. Instead of challenging the framework of interpretation means rearranging our manner of perceiving the world. Such tasks appear to be far from the present. It seems abstract, meaningless, in the face of contemporary suffering, and it suggests that people can be made to change their oppressive activities. Marked at oppressive activities.
Okay. What is a vision of indigenismo?
Sure. I guess maybe it's more important to say what the vision is. Deloria makes a distinction between an idea and a vision. An idea is essentially a reformist strategy because it just...
So what's a vision?
A vision is something that, quote, presents a whole picture of experience, a central meaning. It's one that takes into account multiple different things that ideas don't, i.e. personal experience, etc., etc.
A vision is a way of thinking, an idea is a product of that. So physical manifestation,
Okay,
like
way
laws.
of thinking. Got it. What is the way of thinking of indigenismo?
I think that there are several components to indigenismo, and I don't think that any of them, there's a collective identity to it. But indigenismo,
What is indigenismo?
Indigenismo is a particular strategy used by certain sects of Latina with an @ sign groups in South America. Persons like the Zapatistas, for example, use aspects of indigenismo in order to further their own identification as a resistance strategy to neocolonial and white supremacist institutions, organizations. It's a way of thinking that is a product of and resistance to white supremacy.
Okay. What does it mean to have epistemic diversity within the university?
Sure, our gross feudal evidence indicates that it's sort of a three-step process. Let me just pull it up. It says, first we have to acknowledge the epistemic racism, sexism that constitute epistemic structures. 2, we have to break with the universalism. And 3, we have to bring epistemic diversity to create a pluriverse of meaning. So the way the 1AC does this is the reading of sort of the...
What is universalism?
Well, it's sort of the idea that there is one thing that is true for everything. It presumes that it is the end-all be-all of truth.
Okay, what was the third point again?
To bring epistemic diversity to create a pluriverse of meanings.
Plural?
Pluriverse.
Pluriverse, what is that?
It's basically the opposite of universalism, where it's multiple different experiences, multiple different perspectives, etc., instead of relying on a singular epistemic basis for truth.
Why?
So it's to say that Western thinking is not bad, but its domination is bad.
It
so
allows
it's to say that-
inter-epistemic conversations. Our
So-
argument is that, like,
so
maybe...
so you're saying that the Western canon of thought can exist within a pluriverse?
I don't think that... I think that the term Western is being conflated here. Whenever Gross-Fugel and Mengele use Western, they're critical of the hegemonic portion of that logic. So no,
what
like,
is not
so,
hegemonic portion of Western knowledge?
like 2 + 2 = 4.
Math. How is that Western?
It's not math. It's like there are aspects of
Western?
it. Again, they're critical of the totalizing nature of it. So whenever you would ask, can Western logic exist within pluriverse, it's weird because whenever they say Western logic, they mean the hegemonic aspect of it. So no, hegemony cannot exist in pluriverse of meanings.
So its hegemony is bad,
Okay.
but the canon of thought is fine.
Again, I think that the canon of thought is inextricably tied to its hegemony.
Okay.
Drop the other one.
No.
So
Huh?
I was trying to do.
What do you like?
Alright.
I need coffee.
I need caffeine as well.
What? There's only one thing that's gonna be on the computer.
One of. So there's one thing on the computer?
Yeah, that I'm gonna send
Okay.
you an email right now. Do you have your computer, Anita? Because I'll send it to you in the email.
Oh, yeah, true. Let's pull it up to here.
There's a chain that I think you're on.
Oh yeah, I should just reply to that. That'd be the right thing to do. You just read the top card.
You already sent it?
No, I'm sending it right
Oh,
now.
okay.
Alright.
Did you receive it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Did you receive it?
No, you know on my computer.
Refresh it.
Can I just read off yours?
No.
What? There's none yet. So. That'd be better.
No language. I'm laughing because Landon's partner is speed reading disability arguments and Candace said slow. Slow. Good.
Yeah.
The affirmative may think it is epistemically distinct from the political order they criticize, but their intellectual protocols unconsciously focus on the contingent suffering, crowding out any consideration for the structural suffering of the red and the black, whose world has already ended. Left-leaning critical scholarship is another weapon of the world's war against us, Wilderson intent. The grammar of political ethics is grammar of assumptions regarding the ontology of suffering, which underwrites political discourse, is also unspoken and crowds out other structures of suffering, regardless of the sentiment of the film or the spirit of unity mobilized by the political discourse in question. Structures of ontological suffering stand in an antagonistic rather than conflictual relation to one another. We now live in a political academic milieu which stresses diversity, unity, civic participation, hybridity, access, and contribution. The radical fringe of political discourse amounts to little more than a passionate dream of civic reform and social stability. The distance between the protester and the police has narrowed the effectiveness upon the academies. The intellectual protocols tend to privilege unconscious identifications, evidence of humanity's postmodern regimes of diversity, hybridity, and relative rather than master narratives. A pluriversality of the academy's ensemble of questions are fixated on specific and unique experience of the myriad identities that make up the structural position. The upshot of this is that intellectual protocols now in play in the composite effect of political discourses in the 1980s tend to hide rather than make explicit the grammar of suffering which underwrites the U.S. and its foundational antagonism. State of affairs exacerbates or more precisely mystifies and veils the ontological death of the slave and the savage. Academic inquiries thus no more effective in pursuing a revolutionary critique than the legislative antics of the loyal opposition. This is how left-leaning critical scholarship helps civil society recuperate and maintain stability, but this stability is a state of emergency for Indians and blacks, and the capacity of the academy to propagate and promulgate settler colonial knowledge is possible through the consumption, regurgitation, and access and projection to the knowledge, pain narratives, and language of subjugated peoples. Feeding the settlers' will to know is masked by the claim to universal and objective knowledge production, which mystifies the settlerism of the academies. A call to pluriversality, the demand to include Tuck and Yang, no day. When we invoke the academy or the academy, we are invoking a community practices focused upon the propagation and promulgation of settler colonial knowledge. There are some forms of knowledge that the academy does not deserve, like indigenismo, because we have observed the academy a community of practice that is the whole. So one, stockpiles examples of injustice, yet will not make explicit a commitment to social justice. Two, produces knowledge shaped by the imperatives of the nation state while claiming neutrality and universality in knowledge production. Three, accumulates intellectual capital while informants give a part of themselves away. 4, absorbs or repudiates competing knowledge systems while claiming limitless horizons beyond narratives of pain. There may be language, experience, and wisdoms better left alone by social science. Polygon Allen notes that for many indigenous peoples, a person expected to know no more than this is necessary, sufficient, and congruent with their spiritual social place. In the white world, information is to be saved and analyzed at all costs. It is not seen as residing in the minds and molecules of human beings, but as transcendent. Civilization's intended virtues of freedom and primacy depend on the accessibility of millions of megabytes of data, no matter that the data has lost its meaning or virtue by its loss of its human context. And the metaphorization of decolonization diverts from the question of settler guilt and responsibility by focusing on decolonization of the mind and epistemic solution as the end-all be-all. This is the settler move to innocence and makes decolonization impossible. Metaphorization of decolonization destroys the possibility of actually killing the settler and focusing on the physical occupation of indigenous land, which maintains the colonial order. There's a settler futurity to the colonized. This only means genocide. Tuck and Yang 12. To use colonization as a metaphor for oppression reduces mental colonization, logically leading to the solution of decolonizing one's mind, and the rest will follow. Colonialism is comprised of global and historical relations, however, cannot be reduced to a global answer nor a historical answer. To do so is to use colonization metaphorically. Decolonization is not converting indigenous politics to a Western doctrine of liberation. It is not a philanthropic process of helping the at-risk or alleviating suffering. It is not a generic term for struggle against oppressive conditions and outcomes. The broad umbrella of social justice may have room underneath for all of these efforts. By contrast, decolonization specifically requires repatriation in indigenous land and life. We're asking you to consider how the pursuit of critical consciousness, the pursuit of social justice through a critical enlightenment, can also be settler moves to innocence, diversions, distractions which relieve the settler feelings of guilt or responsibility and conceal the need to give up land, power, privilege. And the affirmative misunderstands the structure of violence they are resisting. Violence does not only operate repressively, but also parasitically. The negation of the structure, their former resistance only fuels its fire, providing a perverted pleasure to those resisting and producing excess value for the world that turns the affirmative. Survival is the link. Patterson in 82. What does the master make of the slave's yearning for dignity itself? Part of his wider yearning for disalienation and relief for the settlers, masters, all embracing power. It is all but a handful of slave-holding societies. The master exploits this very yearning for his own benefit. By holding out the promise of redemption, the master provides himself with a motivating force more powerful than any whip. Slavery in this way was a self-correcting institution. What it denied the slave, it utilized as the major means of motivating him. The slave's struggle made it necessary that the master, in order to make the slavery workable, provide an opportunity for the negation of slavery. The conflict between master and slave became transformed from a personal into an institutional dialectic in which slavery as an enduring social process stood opposite to and required manumission as an essential precondition. Parasitism is suggested to continue ranging from minor dependence or exploitation to major Hegelian dependence on the part of the dominator and grave survival risk for the dominated. Parasitism is most rewarding for the parasite when both he and the parasitized party minimize laziness. Indeed, if maximizing laziness is a parasite's major objective, he is often better off cooperating with the other party in the attainment of the social optimum, the optimal joint utilities of himself and the other person, in other words, to give up extreme parasitism and move toward mutualism. Peace, order, and civilization in the world, the white world, has always meant our death, and anything short of refusing it is a pitiful structural adjustment, further mystifying death as the status quo of the indigenous and enslaved, and incorporating into the academy ghettoizes their politics into obscurity. European academic structures homogenize native epistemology. Even in this call for pluriversality means the institution that they want pluriversality to become is going to homogenize native epistemology. Kawakanen 03. Indigenous studies programs marginalization and ghettoization of special studies is a form of Eurocentrism, which leads to dismissing them as fringe programs. The Adamster model of education is to overcome oppression. Objectification of native peoples also takes place in native studies programs. Do not seriously challenge the hierarchical structures that maintain exclusionary practices in the academy at large, thus leaving the underlying inequalities and marginalization intact. Programs has accomplished little, if anything. The transformation of academic institutions requires subversion rather than the creation of parallel structures. Non-Western content injected into white studies format has been filtered through the lens of Eurocentric conceptualization. These procedures reinforce systemic racism and colonial hegemony. This recognition may confine and ghettoize their expertise. Using indigenous scholars for educating the non-indigenous public poses a problem for the politics of distraction, diverting the attention of indigenous people from their own priorities to the priorities of the dominant society, demanding pluriversality. Thus, the framework of this debate is who best performs an unflinching paradigmatic analysis en route to ending the world. We must refuse to affirm in order to move to a world towards the end of the world, because a socially dead slave has been inviting the world to commit itself to a dance with death. Thus, the only ethical action is to learn the steps, embroiled in absolute dereliction, total incoherence. Only if you let yourself be articulated by blackness, embraced by death, not as an identity, but as a positionality, as a guiding ethic, ignited by a politics of refusal to affirm the world, refusal to affirm within the world, refusal in order to affirm a program of complete disorder en route to ending the world with an intent. A truly revolutionary movement should grasp the invitation to assume the positionality of subject to social death. If we are to be honest with ourselves, we must admit that the Negro has been inviting whites as well as civil society's junior partners to dance of social death for hundreds of years, but few have wanted to learn the steps. They have been and remain today invested elsewhere. That's not to say that all opposition to politics desire today is pro-white, but is usually anti-black, meaning that it will not dance with death. Black liberation as a prospect makes radicalism more dangerous to the United States because its condition of possibility and gestures of resistance function as a negative dialectic of politics of refusal to affirm a program of complete disorder. One must embrace its disorder, its incoherence, and allow oneself to be elaborated by it if indeed one's politics are to be underwritten by a desire to take down this country. The state of political movements in the United States today is marked by this very Negrophobogenesis, the fear of the end of the world. The work will fail, for it is always work from a position of coherence. On behalf of a position of incoherence of the black subject of prison slave, there remain coalitions operating within the logic of civil society and function less as revolutionary promises than as crowding out scenarios of black antagonism, simply feeding our frustration. From the coherence of civil society, the black subject beckons with the incoherence of civil war. War that reclaims blackness not as a positive value, but as a political enabling site. To quote Fanon of absolute dereliction, it is a scandal that renders civil society asunder. It is a black speculating in the wings and endless antagonism. It cannot be satisfied via a form of reparation, but that must nonetheless be pursued to the death. And the prior right issue of framing the impact calculation in every flow is that it is unethical to be free in a world of slaves and genocide of things. Their impact centralizes the grammar suffering of the master, which is contingent relation to violence. This immunity from structural violence is born from the suffering of the black and the red who are positioned by violence in every interaction with the world, including debate, wilderness, and intent. If accumulation of fungibility of the modalities to which blackness is positioned as incapacity, then genocide is a modality to which redness is positioned as incapacity. Ontological incapacity is the constituent element of ethics. One cannot embody capacity and be simultaneously ethical where there are slaves to understand ethical to be free. The coherence of whiteness is structural position. Modernity depends on the capacity to be free from genocide, perhaps not as a historical experience, but as a structuring modality.
I have a question.
Right there.
I have a question about some of the where you've read parts of some of these cards. Things like the Tuck and Yang evidence. I couldn't find the word indigenismo in here. Where was that? Like the Tuck and Yang no date evidence, the 2014 forthcoming.
That was my own analytic.
Okay, and same thing with pluriversity. I actually couldn't find that in any of the cards you've read. Was that also just you adding to the card?
It was the tag. I was adding to the
Like
tag.
like one of the Tuck and Yang 12.
The one that cards about indigenismo is the one on the computer.
Yeah.
That talks about indigenous
Well, I know, but
knowledge.
he said the word indigenismo already.
I think that was
I
probably
didn't see it.
the tag.
Well, he said
Yeah,
Academy does not deserve knowledge like indigenismo.
Yeah,
It's not in here.
it's not there. Why
Okay.
can't I add my own thing?
Okay, I
Why
was
is it
just
like
about
script?
wondering.
Yeah.
Okay.
I added it. Yeah, because the analysis is critiquing that inclusion
Got it.
of a pluriversality
Okay.
to the academy, same
Okay.
institution within civil society.
Okay, I got you. So your Tuck and Yang evidence about the metaphor of colonization.
Mhm.
I'm curious, what about the 1AC uses a metaphor of decolonization or colonization?
You're focused on epistemology as the end-all, be-all, as the crux of your problem and the crux of your solution. Metaphorizes decolonization because it is to say that if we can change epistemic structures, then we can change the antagonism of settler colonialism. But what we're saying is that this focus on the mind trades off with seeing that the violence is in the physical occupation of land and the
Hold on, the Tuck and Yang
elimination of
evidence
spiritual
says that we
structures.
should not allow settler move towards innocence.
Yeah,
I
you're
am
after
not
settler
a
move-
settler. I am settled. Why should I not talk about the
I'm sorry, but it's
decolonization?
a settler move to innocence.
The settler move towards innocence is white people no longer feeling guilty for being on this land.
Yeah.
I am indigenous. Why should I maintain that guilt that I'm on a land that's my own?
You move to you're
How
you're
am
hold on,
I-
you're
I think
triggering a
that
settler
the
move to
scholarship
innocence.
of the 1AC
The scholarship is
embodies
a move to
settlerism,
innocence.
and it is a settler move to innocence. I
But
think you
none
affirm
of the scholars
a
of the
settler move
1AC
to
are
innocence.
settlers. Deloria,
But what you're doing, the scholarship
Yeah, but yeah,
that you are producing,
exactly.
is a
It's a
settler
s-
move to innocence. And let's
None
not
of those
disavow.
people
Let
are
us not
settlers. Hold on.
disavow
Okay,
the
so-
fact that
so
your
it's the-
partner is a settler. Let's
And
not
no,
disavow that
so-
fact.
So you
It's about the scholarship and also the partnership.
so you're
Yes.
so you're saying that you can be complicit in settler colonialism just because you're settled?
That's what I was wondering.
That's-
Is
so
that
you're saying-
simply
that's what
your
you're saying?
argument? No, I was asking. Max, you can answer questions. I think I'm done.
So your alternative is an unflinching paradigmatic analysis.
Yeah.
What is that?
Paradigmatic analysis is one that focuses on the antagonisms at the root of the world, which is to say the black accumulation and fungibility and right genocide are the constituent elements of this world, and that you can't focus, if you focus on anything else within the world, it trades off with saying what constitutes the world. And if you can't do that, you can't move towards ending it because the entire world is unethical.
Okay, so I guess my last question is your quote in evidence.
Yeah.
Is there nothing redeemable about the academy?
No, because it is within the world.
Okay.
It's structured by genocide. The only reason that the academy could have existed in the first place, you're claiming Western hegemony, that could only be materialized through settler colonialism and genocide and black accumulation and fungibility.
Okay. Thank you.
Are you just want those?
Do you need the cards?
Yes. All right, 9:35. Oops.
Is it the one in the Dropbox?
Yeah, I'll just have to explain.
I want some coffee.
Is there any downstairs at the tent that we could get something?
I have no idea. Where'd my green pen
Oh,
go? Where'd you find it? Thank you.
there's also like a mouse USB thing down there. I don't know if this
Oh,
is
that's
yours.
okay. Oh, no, that's not us.
Okay.
Unless it broke.
Trigger warning.
Nancy.
Oh, did the
Really?
trigger warning y'all?
The hand is a trigger warning for him.
The hand?
Hand.
Like
The
what?
word
Like
hand.
hand?
No, it's not.
Yeah, that's what it said.
I know, but no, it's not.
But it's fine. We have cards in fact turning trigger warning.
I mean, nothing special, straight down. Didn't know if that really
The
order.
top one got pulled up is just 26 out of 27. 25 teams were DUSAG in the top bracket.
There were no dues.
This is round 7.
This is round 7.
Oh,
There are no
you're
second
talking-
teams.
I thought you were talking
Yeah.
about yesterday.
No, yesterday the fun ups was awful.
Yeah, I thought we were talking about yesterday.
Fresno got pulled up to beat Houston, so
Oh, it's that.
yeah.
List of-
Alright, are we good? I guess I'll wait for JP.
Go on.
Oh, well, I'm actually starting with their link cards if you want to
No,
go.
I'm saying
Okay.
I know it's going to be on this page, but go on.
Alright. First link argument is not us because the spectacles of violence. Our argument is not literally, but is literally the exact opposite. Our Delory evidence is to not focus on the instances of suffering because that forms a call to action because that is one an attempt to perform i.e. provide an idea to get rid of the immediate suffering. Our argument is a holistic frame of the way that modernity and coloniality come about, i.e. coloniality, the process of knowledge that makes physical manifestations of colonialism possible. Internal linkers, their second piece of Tuck and Yang is now they say Tuck and Yang in a day. Their evidence is in the context of social sciences, anthropology, doing social scientific studies, going out and doing research. Argument is not the performance doing research, but rather the performance of a Latino and Latina identity, the indigenismo as a product of a vision, a whole picture of experience, the collective identity, the changing the way of thinking about the world that makes colonialism impossible because we can no longer internal linkers. Now our linkers, that's because their status quo, because your evidence says that the reason why the university is able to make those parasitic performances is because it has a claim to neutrality and universality. Of fecal evidence says that the polarverse, the movement toward polarverse is one that fractures the universality of the university, i.e. pluriverse versus universe. Universality is one that depends upon the ability to have that conscription, the Western social scientific knowledge then being backed upon indigenous people to make a claim about that grammar of suffering argument. Internal linkers because they represent the grammar of suffering narratives. Also, further internal linkers because of the whole picture of experience of the white supremacist discussion is not located within a specific identity of white, black, indigenous, but indigenous, rather the holistic frame. We need to understand the multiple intersections of logical white supremacy, which means that their alternative is an effective Smith and Sam. We measure take against the white supremacy when assuming that single fashion white supremacy is by separate, distinct, but distinct logics. The three primary logics of white supremacy include slavery, ability to increase capitalism, genocide, which include colonialism, orientalism, making wars. The logic of slavery, black is inherently stable. The logic of self-making consistent logic of increase capitalism. A second pillar of white supremacy, logic of genocide, logic of indigenous people, and must always be disappearing non-native peoples that become the rightful invaders of walls and genocide to serve the ankle colonialism. Third pillar of white supremacy is logic of orientalism. The logic of orientalism marks certain people, certain nations as inferior their nation as a permanent form of the the empire. Orientalism sort of thing, orientalism was the last U.S. to defend the logic of slavery and genocide. The Christ, they know to stay strong. Not fight the cause of war. The United States, not war. The United States is war. Also, internal linkers of their academy arguments because the question of removing ourselves from the academy is one that abandons it to a space that allows for white supremacy may maintain intact. The two pieces of volume and breakaway citations of the one I see are indicative that there's a feedback effect between the university and the academic structures, i.e. the knowledge that we produce as an academic spaces as debate are recruited. The CSIS directly recruits from the debate, uses the knowledge that's gained within those studies that are produced in debate rounds to then create legal institutions because they are a think tank that then affects laws. All of those have a feedback effect, which means that there is a distinct notion or necessity as gained in the academy. Also, furthermore, the reduction for the academy is the erasure of the indigenous bodies within the academy, too, which is the logic of genocide that indigenous people must always be disappearing, which means that their logic is not allowable, which means that even if there's a risk, it is a necessary survival strategy to maintain ourselves. Now they say that we are settler moved to a guilt. That's a trade-off distance that I don't think they have uniqueness for. There is no white people who are pushing to get off the land now because they're guilty for this logic, which means that there's only a risk that the affirmative is one that's able to result. This also requires them to win the entire thesis of the argument that the epistemology is not produce physical manifestation or Delory evidence, as well as the citation of Solomon Bray, which directly contradict this, i.e. you must know a way to think about the world before you can interact with the world. That produces the justification for those, which means our Smith evidence is also an internal link turn to the Tuck and Yang argument. Also, it's really indicative of their argument to believe that I have a settler move towards innocence. Max's positionality in the round is one that he gives himself up to me, i.e. the presencing of a vision of indigenismo is one that is not a move towards innocence, rather is a move towards recognition of the guilt within that positionality, which also means that we link turn their forms of violence to law. Our Delory evidence is indicative of this as above. This argument is not an attempt to remove the enactment of the gratuitous violence, i.e. the way that genocide occurs against indigenous black brownies, brown bodies, the logics of Orientals, and the anchor of the relationship between Cuba, South Shakor, which also means that there's no risk of opacity arguments now. Epistemology precedes ontology because it shapes the way we interact with other subjects. We must know subjects inferior before we can enact violence upon them. Wilson and Arignolo and he and 12. The case was opposite between the Westman saying, well, the design of biologists, but there's book do not say here based on so many enunciation geopolitics knowledge is so crucial. Decolonial thinking is just one dark Singaporean mediums already be the press de-westernization. Epistemology crucial. Decolonial thinking ontology is always exactly some contract source necessary and sufficient to study economic and political aspects of capitalism. Knowledge we have about the consequence of capitalism always supersede the control of knowledge and access to institutions to create, transform, and maintain. And now we're saving. Now Wilson's analysis of modernity and accurately ascribes a base of modernity to the Atlantic commercial trade and misses the epistemic basis of modernity. The focus on slavery allows a continuation of Eurocentric thought and violence and reinscribes new forms of violence by elevating philosophy
the narrative of the new universal also internally turns their tuck and yang ambits, because the paradigmatic analysis is one that takes place within the university, but their elevation of that to the universal narrative, the grammar of suffering for indigenous and black persons, one that A, misses out Orientalism as the third tertiary aspect of white supremacy, and B, is that same universalism. And YOLO intended the Atlantic commercials are going to immediately become the location of Western hegemonic power. It was one more controversial like majority of the moment of Western history linked to the American struggle and transformation of capitalism, Western civilization, macro narrative emerged in the Renaissance, consolidated the enlightenment of German philosophy. This macro narrative fights the historiography, both macro narratives front of the same principle of Western epistemology majority. It's often celebrated type coloniality, yet is critique as a coloniality. The Kuroda Barnes and by Quijano is the inscription of the colonial difference, the consequences of humanity, yet colonialism is the first coloniality is the constituent majority, is the consequence which still litigated under the same regime. Now the affirmative is a prerequisite to the alternative. They have to see the portion of the affirmative that's about the COINTELPRO operations. We need to understand the tactics that are utilized by academic structures as well as the legal institutions, such as the COINTELPRO FBI operations, before we can have an effective side of resistance. Things like snitch checking of the process by which we do not know what is going on with the CIA. Therefore, they're able to take people like Anime Patua Quash and snitch check at them, where they took her and immediately released her to make her look as if she was a informant. So persons of the American Indian movement would kill her to believe that she was an informant, which means that opacity is a net disset to their argument, because opacity prevents us from being able to have those conversations where we can learn what actually happened whenever she was captured by the FBI, but rather presumes guilt people for innocence, because we can never be known within this. It means our argument is not to present grammars of suffering for the purpose of inducing guilt, but an act of refuting historical and genesis amnesia. Policies that regulate the type of pedagogy that students are exposed to can contribute to genesis amnesia. There's a feedback effect between the academy and legal institutions, which means the only survival strategy is one within the academy, which means our presentation of the Geronimo narrative is not for the purpose of saying that there was violence done upon him, but recognizing the relationship between indefinite detention, how the U.S. has legally codified that into law by using those as historical precedent. Ptolemy and Brave 12 still legislated to silence because a tool will silence the actions, education, operative ethics, suppression, historic and different the history of imperialism, colonization, the United States. These discourses bring notion of language, legal instrument, empire, the long history of the historic empire, and forever remains made an official linguistic structure proposed social, political, and political conditions of indigenous people to the process of semantic imperialism by controlling the education and language of indigenous people. The colonized believe they foster a sense of dependency by creating a new need for the colonized. The process of rhetorical imperialism is made manifest. These processes of effects on indigenous community, many of which have come to internalize the colonized language. This emphasis of control of knowledge and language through the colonization, like colonization, correct through curse through the imposition of linguistic norm on indigenous community, rhetorical imperialism, source control by setting the terms of linguistic imperialism, aim to control marginalized people's minds and to contribute to a type of genesis amnesia that causes historical trauma. Genesis amnesia refers to literally forget the beginning. Laws and policies that regulate the type of education information students are exposed to. Pedagogy and curriculum become regulated and normalized to reflect the ideology of those in power. People become convinced that this is the way it's always been. Also, internally, there's the woke and evidence, because that is the survival strategy argument above. Also means that there's no internally to the tuck and yang metaphorization argument. That evidence is critical of social justice movements who use colonization as a metaphor for the struggle as a metaphor for other instances of violence, i.e., the persons, the prison body being one that is overdetermined or overdominated by black bodies being a form of colonization. That metaphorization is one that doesn't recognize the physical manifestation. That our argument is therefore not that form of metaphorization, because we recognize the physical colonization of the land. The bird evidence that was also cited, the one I see indicates that there's a direct relationship between colonization of the mind and colonization of the physical land. The embodiment is thus the strategy to link the two, to link my body to my knowledge production, to result that they have fundamentally misunderstood the point of reading. The one I see in the debate is not meant as a form of social change. Debate is inevitable. The question is what we get out of it. We forfeit the question of indigenous identity for a multiplicity of reasons. The act of debating is an improvement we can take back to our communities in a decolonizing fashion. This is central to pedagogically challenging the university as a site of colonization of indigenous minds and bodies. We're pedagogically hailed to precedence. These knowledges in the space is grande and for the degree which is still self-determining is one flexibility reals itself as a source of interior examination. UNT possibly get by vengeance of law, policy to take control of any life out of their hands. Colonization, the manifestation of rhetorical imperialism. That is the ability of dominant powers to assert the control of others by setting the terms of debate. The erosion of indigenous national sovereignty between rhetorically imperialist use language by white powers does as language central to the colonialist project must be central to the project of colonization. Red pedagogy compels students to question how white terminology is related to the process of colonization. Red pedagogy aims to create awareness about classroom disagreements, helping foster discontent about the inconsistency between the world as it is and the world as it should be. Decolonization means students require not only knowledge of the oppressed but also skills to handle and negotiate the implications of such knowledge. Indigenous people must learn to job without becoming separatists. We must be willing to reach out to the contradictions within our experience and open ourselves to the pain and joy of others. Now you say, quote, and evidence your author and later writing indicates that lack of visibility in indigenous women's issues is devastating. Their evidence is more specific to the references about treaties and is not a practical strategy for indigenous people, especially indigenous women. Quoting and 12 decolonization with women's and indigenous women become prominent in the for indigenous women log. Then the lack of recognition which indigenous women commonly experience human rights violations across the individual collective identity. The key concerns with the dichotomy between private and public sphere. The declaration emphasizes the applied equally to male and female indigenous women without individual self-determination, meaningful collective self-determination. Indigenous people not simply possible because the new and example. On one hand, they advocate and human rights framework that equal provides an individual collective right to pierce the indigenous self-determination movement, violence against women's ethics and indigenous rights, nor a human rights issue. Now, opacity is not a surefire strategy. This has quote uses opacity to cover over its ideological wars. Our commitment to visibility challenges that structure and forces them to defend their actions, which means that we have a better internal link to the poor reverse argument that was made in cross-examination. The three steps across critical outlines, which we challenge the epistemic and racist frame of knowledge of the academy, which means that you should not present yourself with a Sophie's choice of the alternative, the affirmative. Our arguments of the methodologies are not competitive with each other. Not a reason why the affirmative is a bad idea. You should not force the indigenous people to choose between the different strategies in order to have an authentic indigenous identity. Ready?
Hold on. Alright, hold on. Alright, go ahead.
My first question, what was the argument that you're making on the internal link turn to survival strategies?
There were a couple of them. First is like if the university has a feedback effect between the academy and law, then the only relationship has to be one of the university, because otherwise it leaves those legal institutions in place.
You guys know?
That was it?
That I mentioned several survival strategies, so I don't know which one you're referencing.
I was
but
just
I think that
asking
was
what the internal link turn was.
internal link turn. I said that survival strategy was good. The F is one. I don't know what you mean.
Oh, I thought you had made an internal link turn argument. Sorry.
No.
Alright, you read Grande. Grande says you need to pedagogically challenge the academic institution. Now, why do you want to seek inclusion of a plural versality within the same institution?
I don't think we're inclusion, actually. I think that's decisively what Gross-Spiegel is meant to challenge. Your Wilderson evidence about diversity is about postmodern tolerance, not the F.
How is the call for pluriversality different from inclusion?
Because inclusion means to be a participant within. So much like multiculturalism is to have different disparate identities then converge into one.
So you're
inclusion
saying
is different knowledges converging to one.
Is only to eliminate the hegemonic
no,
knowledge, but to include.
Not to include. So inclusion is take disparate knowledges, form it into one, therefore we produce the new knowledge with the understanding of the others. Pluriversality is don't let there be that one. So don't let indigenous knowledge become part of Western knowledge. Therefore not inclusion, it's separatism. It's the opposite of
But
inclusion.
within the academy, separate but within the academy.
No, within the pluriverse.
Where is the pluriverse?
That's the F, is we create a pluriversity. That
So
is the link turn of the F. We are not the university, we are the pluriversity. And your Tuck and Yang No Day 2014 book forthcoming argument actually indicts the university because of its ability to pretend to be neutral and universal with its knowledge.
Where do you create this pluriverse? What I'm asking.
This debate round.
And this debate round is
This
part of
debate
the
round is an
academy, right?
academic space. We became a pluriversity.
So okay. So then you're saying that you make a pluriversality within the academic space.
I think that
Yes or
you
no?
I think that you keep using the word academy too interchangeably. Whenever Tuck and
Academic
Yang use
space,
it, they
right.
mean it as university. We say pluriversity.
Yes, fine. I'm not talking. Okay, fine. Just clarify. I'm not talking about university. I'm talking about the academic space. So,
Yes.
So you say you create a
But
pluriverse within
the
the academic.
the problem is that they're too tied in the status quo. Like academy and university are synonymous now, so I don't think that we should use the term academy to believe it's like something separate. Those two things are directly intertwined. So whenever we say debate, we change it. We don't mean the academy and the and the status quo interpretation of academy.
All right, cool.
That's the link term.
Now, you talk about there should be no universal grammar of suffering. Then you're saying
No. That's not what we said. We said that
You
we
thought- you were talking
understand
about
the universal grammar of suffering from the position of coloniality as the necessary prerequisite to colonialism.
Well,
We begin from the present of the grammar of suffering, not from spectacles of violence. That's the Deloria
No,
card.
I'm talking about your critique of Wilderson's about like this grammar of ethics. Now, how are you indicting this?
The indite was an epistemic indite to Wilderson, where he ascribes modernity's beginning.
Because you're saying we're universalizing this grammar of ethics.
No, you're universalizing the position from where modernity begins as the Atlantic Circuit trade. We believe it begins with the Renaissance,
Okay.
with the revival of Greek forms of knowing.
Can I have the cards that I read in 1 and C?
Oh, yes. Here you go.
And what do you mean by a holistic frame? What is the holistic frame of the 1AC? Or what is the holism of the 1AC?
Holistic. That's the vision.
Huh?
The vision.
Okay.
Yes. Well.
expelled that from school. Like, lectured me. I didn't even write the ticket. He was just like, here's a lecture about school.
Where's the cops?
Oh, the cops gave you a lecture? Yeah. I wonder if there's a black person smoking.
Oh, you get held to jail.
I just get a ticket. Yeah. Isn't this a smoke free campus?
Yeah.
Yeah, you get a ticket.
Are you ready?
Yeah? Okay. The greatest power is the power to pose the question, and the slave poses the fundamental question. It is the question of what do you do in the face of social death as genocide and enslaved things when you have been divested of capacity and culture. The figure of social death of genocide and enslaved things that have such irreconcilable losses that cannot be redeemed. The only thing to do is to refuse to affirm, negate everything, including the precious thing you hold dear in this world. This is what makes for true revolution. The thing we do love are still parasitic on the social death. This only feeds the fire of civil society, which is what the Wilson piece of evidence is talking about. This is why the framework of fundamental question you have to answer at the end of the debate is who best performs an unflinching paradigmatic analysis route to ending the world. I don't think they have a counter-interpretation of the framework, which means that this is how you evaluate your ballot at the end of the debate, and we have a yeah, I'll get to that. Their focus, and you can extend the Wilson piece of evidence that unethical to be free in a world of genocide and enslaved things. Their focus is a position that seeks to be free in a world of slaves as they look for a plural university within the intellectual protocol of the academy. It is unethical to be free in a world of slaves that can win the entire app as long as they don't resolve the question of the slave and the savage, and they are unethical. That is why we should refuse to affirm. We should refuse to affirm anything that does not meet the demand of the slave, and you can vote negative on presumption. If the affirmative is really a move to recuperate and sustain civil society, and they have conceded civil society as the status quo, then that means any solvency gain not benefit to the affirmative has a perpetuation and perfection of the status quo, which merely means that they are just the status quo, and that means they don't solve. You can vote neg on presumption, and one cannot embody capacity and be simultaneously ethical insofar as they embody capacity. They are unethical. We have a few links to how they affirm their capacity. As long as we prove a link, then we have proven that you must refuse to affirm the first. This is the colonization of the mind. This you can extend tuck and yank the pursuit of social justice and the pursuit of social conscience treats colonization as a metaphor and disavows the material violence of colonization. They treat colonization as something that only happened in the mind and not in the literal clearing of indigenous life and land. The educative enlightenment of the 1AC then is a move to settler fraternity and settler innocence to assuage their guilt and not deal with the material violence which is represented in settler continued occupation of indigenous land. This evidence is specific to the fact that decolonization must be a perpetuation of indigenous land and life. This is why the question of space and genocide are so central and must be forefronted. Anything else trades off with dealing with material violence of genocide and colonization. We see this in the entirety of the 1AC because one of their main impacts that they are claiming to solve for is this gross Fagel evidence that its ultimate impact is epistemicide. That means their only solvency is dependent on a critical consciousness. They are the new version of the I think therefore I am that they criticize. They can think that once they acknowledge violence to get a project of modernity that the ballot represents an epistemic diversity, where the fuck that means, and the violence of thinking proves the link to this card. This is the education of civil society to make you believe that there was something redeemable in the settler master and the human, to believe that you can change them to become educated and therefore make ethical decisions. We think this only focuses on the political economy of civil society, does not question the libidinal economy that also underwrites civil society, which is driven by the need to genocide and accumulate flesh. Focusing on decolonization, one mind will always trade off with dealing with the libidinal drive for flesh to settler of needs in order to transcend themselves into humanists. That's a king. That's the Wilson evidence. They also say that this colonization happens specifically in the mind as a colonization of the kind of epistemologies that happens to indigenous people that allows for the genocide. But this is literally what the card is talking about, that you are disavowing the material violence of genocide, which is reasserted every day of the settler occupation, because before they could colonize indigenous people's minds and wipe out their kind of epistemologies, they needed to settle the land, which is why why space is a fundamental question, that they are not dealing with. The second genocide is the survival genocide. You can extend the Patterson piece of evidence of master settler human must underwrite in resistance in the code of slavery and colonization. He exploits the slave as very yearning for dignity and relief for his own benefit. What is denied, the slave is also used for the major means of motivation. Survival then becomes another tool in the master's house. Slavery opens off with the masters providing the opportunity for negation and survival that require manumission as an essential precondition. Their survival risk, while they might seem like the best coping mechanism, makes sense at first glance, actually then ends up feeding the parasite, and the parasite is most rewarded when both when he and the parasite party reach a point where they are no longer extreme but mutually reinforcing, which is their plural university argument, which is they can both be coexisting and one cannot dominate because they're not hegemonic. This is literally proving the argument of survival becomes a mutuality. Resistance is to oppression, then like water is to life. They are not answering the comparative claims within this card and the actual words within this card. They are only saying the survival is a coping mechanism. Well, we have pretty specific why this is actually dissad and only reifies and sustains and exacerbates and mystifies civil society. The third dissad is the tucking yang evidence on pain narratives. The pain narrative is an entire economy of loving to hear and desiring to hear the pain story, to conquer them through collecting their pain narratives and teaching them how to speak. As much as they are resisting things, they are still getting into the libidinal economy of civil society that they are not answering. What does it mean to review information about secret groups in the debate community? What does it mean the debate community sustains itself off of these kind of pain narratives? They say that this tucking yang evidence is specific to social science, but I think that they are a new form of social science, which is what the Wilderson card works to articulate them as, about how they're moved to multiculturalism and unity and access and contribution within the participation, and able to, let me quote, and able to have epistemic diversity with their role at the ballot is exactly what this Wilderson piece of evidence, this political academic milieu, the social science which stresses diversity, this kind of political diversity that their ballot is calling for, is exactly what mystifies and exacerbates civil society, and is the exact same social science that Tucking Yang is talking about when he says that it needs you to feed the pain narratives, which is the whole top 2 or 3 minutes of the 1AC where they were talking about the kind of pain that happens to indigenous communities. And the fourth dissent that we have is this translucency dissent, which is the Kuakan evidence using indigenous concepts to educate non-indigenous poetics always leads to their consumption and their genocide. I will give you a perfect fucking example of how this happens in the debate community. Jesse Robbins thinks he can come in here and talk about his indigenous identity, so then everybody knows what Naholo means. So then when I get up here and try to articulate what it means to be a structural antagonist within the red presence, Jackie Massey gets to look me in the face and tell me I'm Naholo when he doesn't fucking understand what that means, and desecrates and basically disavows my spirituality. This is how indigenous knowledge gets co-opted within this academic space or the new space they're creating. Jesse definitely thinks that he is creating a new space within the community because he doesn't exist within civil society, but I think I prove as to how that shit always gets co-opted by white people, even if they claim indigeneity, and is always going to be used to disavow indigenous identities within the debate and within their new space that they're creating. I don't think that they have a threshold. I don't think that they have a clear articulation of the threshold between this identity, this idea that they are distinguishing. I think that they're really just an idea. I think that the Tucking Yang piece of evidence is pretty good about how they're just an idea because they don't actualize any kind of materiality and don't deal with the material violence of genocide, which is the ongoing occupation. I think that they say that we make colonialism impossible, but I think my neck on presumption argument answers this back because I think that they're just reifying the status quo. They say that I don't think there's a difference between the university and their universality. I just think that this is just some dumbass fucking semantics that they are making. I think that the Wilderson piece of evidence talks more to the specific grammar that proves that they are the same anti-blackness and red genocide as civil society. They say that we are link turning the academy. We cannot abandon the space for white people to be, for white people to take, but you find the academy redeemable. That is the fucking link. You are not different than civil society, and it doesn't matter whether or not we abandon this space to white people, because white people will always still maintain it whether or not this is in diversity. This is how civil society becomes seductive, because white people then obfuscate the fact that they are in a structural antagonism and then become the hybridity and the diversity that they're talking about. So it mystifies the fact of the structural and gratuitous violence that is actually happening onto their bodies. They say that we are an erasure of indigenous in the academy, but I think we have a clear test as to why bringing the indigenous identity into the academy is bad. I think that this also proves why I don't talk about specifically my spirituality and indigeneity within the debate spaces anymore, because this shit just gets co-opted. I'm an actual indigenous position that is talking about how we need to have a paradigmatic analysis that actually deals with this. They say that we don't push white people off the land, but this proves exactly how you don't deal with the material violence because you are just a critical consciousness. They say that this Deloria evidence, there's no way to interact without thinking, but this is just a settler move to innocence because they don't focus so much on the body, but the position. The indigenous people literally had to be colonized first. They had to be genocided and cleared off the land. The settler had to create a settlement, which is the material violence, before they can go and spread their canon of thought. They say that only survival strategies within the academy, but I think that we have clear disads to the affirmative, and which is why you can first vote neg on presumption, because they're the same shit as civil society, and they make the world worse.
All right. What is an unflinching paradigmatic analysis?
It would be focusing on the structural antagonisms that cohere civil society.
What does
and
that
there's-
mean? What does it mean to focus on? So just to recognize that they exist?
No, it would be like taking an unflinching stance in it.
So
Once you
also possible.
once you recognize that it exists, the only ethical thing for you to do within that is to refuse it.
Okay,
We
so what
think
does it
that
mean
the
to refuse
affirmative
it?
takes a stance of trying to
No, I don't
redeem
care what
civil
you think the app is. What
I
does
know
it mean
you
to
don't.
refuse it? How do you refuse it? I'm wondering what your alt
To-
is and how you do it.
to refuse.
What does it mean to refuse?
It means to refuse the redemption of civil society, refuse
Affirmative
anything,
act
and
is
refuse,
in
hold on,
civil
refuse
society.
anything that calls you to order, that calls you to enact upon making society better, because
We don't
that
think
is
it's-
what
hold on,
sustains
hold
civil
on.
society, is conflict
Can I ask a
resolution.
question?
You can
You
ask
keep talking
as
about
many
it.
questions as you want.
Okay, so you have made several claims about how indigeneity gets co-opted in debate space. What about?
I think I provided a good ass
Yeah, and
example
what
of how
about
that shit happens.
Wilderson? Because there's like a ton of white kids in high school reading this shit. How is what you do not also risking being co-opted?
That's what we're talking about, is the gratuitousness of this violence. That's why the
Yeah,
only
agreed.
ethical thing that you can do within the face of this gratuitousness is to refuse it.
But it becomes fungible. What you have done becomes fungible as well. So what's the distinction between the alternative and the app on those links?
The distinction is that we are not providing anything more than the society already has. You try to
Why
do
not?
something
You've
else.
provided an unflinching analysis.
Yes, that like you cannot.
We have said we should walk away from Western civilization. How is that any different from refuse
because
civil society?
I think I do a good job of explaining how you don't walk away from civilization or whatever.
Why? What?
Do you want me to do my speech
you have
again? Like,
reiterated
damn.
several times that we are
talk about how
society. I don't
you
know
are
why
a
you think that
metaphorization
is.
of decolonization through your
Why?
critical
Hold on a
consciousness.
second.
through
That
pursuit of
metaphorization
social
is
justice.
literally about other social justice movements.
You are a
using the
social
term
justice movement.
decolonization.
I think that the Wilderson
act
evidence.
is
I think that the
literally about
Wilderson
the
evidence
taking of the land from
contextualizes
indigenous
how
people.
diversity and multiculturalism
Okay,
within
okay,
left-leaning
hold on,
scholarship
hold
is
on.
a social science
Can
research.
I
The
ask
Tuck
what
and Yang
is
evidence
Can I
talks.
please ask a question?
I mean, I'm trying to answer your first
Yes,
question, but you don't want to
made
hear
a
the
claim.
answer.
What is multiculturalism?
Multiculturalism, I would say that the app is that the stress on diversity
That's
and
not an
including these
answer.
different identity politics within that can exist in one space.
Exist within one space, so creating a new identity out of many. What is the app that's creating
That's
moving
your
towards one?
I don't think there's a difference between what you're trying to distinguish between the university
Melting
and the
pot versus
universality. Sure.
So how is the app melting pot? How is the app saying some aspects of indigenous communities, some aspects
I
of
feel like
black
I'm repeating
identity, and create a
myself
new
here.
identity out of that?
You are creating a new identity. This
What identity?
this universality creates a new identity, a new face to civil society that only sustains it.
What
only
aspect of it is civil society? I get that you've said
I
that a lot,
do-
but what
I
makes
get
it
that.
civil society?
Look, this cross-section is gonna get nowhere if you don't hear me.
What makes it civil society?
I think that we provide a few links. First is the metaphorization. Second is the survival, about how civil society needs to underwrite the survival politics of the slave.
Okay. Thank you. Hey, Max. Who's judging the Guild debate? It's a weird thing. Yeah, it's just an interesting conglomeration of people.
What were you gonna read?
I pulled it up somewhere.
I got it.
Is there any excerpts of the
No. Time. Cool, thanks. All right, everyone good? In the face of the unethicality of the world, the only ethical action is to reckon with the slaves' demand to dance with death. It is a program of complete disorder that refuses the world, that refuses any space within civil society. Even if their 1AC is a call to walk away from Western civilization, this demand is still created within the academic space of civil society. What we are saying is that we are distinct from this because we acknowledge the gratuitousness of violence, of genocide, and accumulation of fungibility, that no space is insulated from this, meaning that everywhere we go is always genocide. There will always be genocide. However, our refusal is key to this, but their call for pluriversality within this specific space, of this room, their call for epistemic diversity is still within civil society. It is Wilson states that to refuse the settler's capacity to be and act in this round is to reject the affirmative within the settlement. For such action recuperates and exacerbates civil society. Blackness has always been calling out to people. It's always refusing the world because the world refuses it. It's a constant call, and the world is constantly moving away from the slave. To move towards the slave is to refuse the world. They have conceded that this is a pick. To refuse to affirm, it means you refuse in all instances. You refuse the affirmative in the things in the world that they want to save. It is to refuse your problems as well. And refusal is key to ending the world. The refusal is the call of the black, the slaves, and the refusal of the world is demand of the savage should be an antagonistic relation to it. The grammar of the slave has an intimate problem with the world and you as well. We have a problem with you and the world. The grammar of the slave refuses the world. We refuse you and the world. And our half% evidence is that the first and fundamental right of the oppressed is the right to refuse. Think about it. The root and starting point of any radicalism is the refusal. You refuse the choices as offered. It's not to say with Western Academy or again. Do we choose to be within Western Academy or to walk away from it? But the question is still within the articulation of civil society. We should refuse civil society writ large. Albert Stemmen 13. The path of the wild spent paved with the refusal. We begin with the right to refuse what has been refused to you. It signals the right of refusal of the choices as offered. We can understand this refusal in terms that Shannon Reddy says that gay marriage is the option that cannot be opposed in the ballot box. When you arrive at the ballot box, you only get to check yes or no, and the no in this case can be more damning than the yes. And so you must refuse the choice as offered, to refuse the call to order, refuse to call others to order, to refuse interpolation, the reinstantiation of the law. When we refuse, we create dissonance, and we allow this dissonance to continue. We refuse the call to order. We refuse order as the distinction between noise, music, chatter, knowledge, pain, and truth. Our goal is not to end the troubles, but to end the world that created those particular troubles as the ones that must be opposed. Refuse the logic that stages refusal as inactivity, as the absence of a plan, is the mode of stalling real politics. Here is the most damning argument. They say that they are not a social movement. At the bottom of his speech, he says, this space is critical because the knowledge that we get out of it, I can take back to my communities. How is that not a social movement? How is that a move? How do they not link to the Tuck and Yang evidence that says that the settler colonial knowledge production is always that which treats communities and frontiers to civilize as a problem-solving mechanism of civil society in order to create the world more ethical, which means to say that which means to say not to reject the world, but to reject a certain hegemon within the world, but still with certain hegemon within the world, but still maintains that the structure of civil society. They misunderstand the gratuitousness of violence. They say that there's the opacity of this side actually prevents the discussion of indigenous peoples, which means that they are guilty to proven innocent, of the oppressor treated as guilty to proven innocent. However, they do not understand the gratuitousness of violence because this is already non-unique. Indigenous peoples and red and black peoples are always already proven guilty to proven innocent because the settler colonial knowledge production and the settler colony itself is predicated upon clearing them out, which means that it doesn't matter whether they're guilty or innocent, they will be cleared out nevertheless for civil society and modernity to exist. Their inability to think pragmatically, paradigmatically trades off with forecloses the possibility of ending the world. And they say that the affirmative is a prerequisite to the alternative, but the key to it is understanding tactics of the academy and legal institution. But this again trades off because this focuses on contingent violence about what the academy and legal institutions can do, rather the structure of the academy and legal institutions writ large as unethical, and they say that survival strategies present, like they present Geronimo, the narrative, and all that. But this is exactly what the Kuokanen evidence is talking about. It's not in the context of indigenous women's invisibility. Rather, it's the context of indigenous fungibility, because you need those certain stories. Honestly, tell me, without those stories in the affirmative, do you think that the affirmative would make sense? Do you think that they would have any sort of ethical pretense in order to solve for these problems? Of course not, because it is that they require indigenous fungibility. They reaffirm the settler colonial knowledge production that demands these these narratives to be in place that demands these pain narratives, even if it's historical experience, to be extracted from these communities. And they, all right, and this is also the reason why you're gonna prefer the impact framing of the negative. The only indictment they have to Wilderson is that we focus on slavery as the root of coloniality. Rather they say it's enlightenment, but that's exactly Wilderson's critique, is that the human was produced out of the Enlightenment. The humanist project of modernity was predicated off of black accumulation, fungibility, and red genocide, which is to say that the encounter is what created these problems, meaning that they are really conceding to the impact framing, which means that you have to focus on the unethicality to be free within the world. And they say that which means that we don't foreclose Orientalism, because we acknowledge that without the Occident, it cannot create Orientalism, meaning the structuring logics of genocide and black accumulation fungibility create the logics of Orientalism, which means that we are a prerequisite to the affirmative, and we solve completely.
9:35.